The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty training ground at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez watched from the equipment shed as the new batch of soldiers filed into formation. Among them walked a woman who immediately caught his attention, not because she stood out, but because she seemed to blend in so perfectly with the group that she almost disappeared. Elena Vasquez moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that drawing attention could mean the difference between life and death. Her uniform was regulation perfect, her boots polished but not gleaming, her hair pulled back in a tight bun that revealed nothing of her personality. To Rodriguez, she looked like any other fresh transfer trying to prove herself in a combat zone. "Listen up, people," Rodriguez barked, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Today we're running advanced marksmanship training. I want to see what you're really made of before we start talking about putting you in harm's way." The group of 12 soldiers stood at attention, their faces a mix of determination and nervousness. Rodriguez had been running these assessments for 8 years, and he could usually read a soldier's potential within the first hour. The cocky ones who thought they knew everything, the scared ones who jumped at shadows, the solid ones who would make good infantry but nothing special, and occasionally the rare ones who surprised him. "We'll be working with the M107 today," Rodriguez continued, gesturing toward a line of long-range sniper rifles laid out on a nearby table. "Barrett 50 caliber, range of 1,800 meters, weighs 30 pounds, kicks like an angry mule. If you've never fired one before, you're in for an education." Elena's eyes flicked toward the weapons for just a moment before returning to Rodriguez's face. She showed no reaction to his words, no hint of excitement or fear. Most soldiers either lit up with anticipation when they heard about the Barrett or went pale, thinking about the legendary recoil. "Vasquez," Rodriguez called out, checking his clipboard. "Step forward." Elena moved with precise steps, stopping exactly 3 feet in front of the sergeant. "Yes, Sergeant." Rodriguez studied her for a moment. According to her file, she had transferred from a logistics unit in Germany. Desk work, essentially. Supply chains and inventory management. Her shooting scores from basic training were adequate but nothing impressive. On paper, she was exactly the kind of soldier who would struggle with advanced marksmanship. "Ever fired a Barrett before, Vasquez?" he asked. "No, Sergeant," Elena replied, her voice steady and neutral. "Well, today's your lucky day." Rodriguez walked over to the weapon table and picked up one of the rifles. As he lifted it, he noticed something felt off. The balance wasn't quite right. He checked the serial number against his list and frowned. This was weapon number 7, one that had been flagged for maintenance issues last week. Rodriguez paused for a moment, considering his options. He could grab a different rifle, but something about Vasquez's complete lack of reaction to the Barrett had irritated him. Most transfers from logistics units were either over-eager to prove themselves or obviously out of their depth. Her calm demeanor felt almost dismissive, as if she wasn't taking the training seriously. "Here we go," Rodriguez said, handing Elena the problematic rifle. "Barrett M107A1, serial number 47-7792, your new best friend for the next 2 hours." Elena accepted the weapon with practiced ease, her hands finding the proper grip points without hesitation. Rodriguez noted that she didn't struggle with the weight the way most newcomers did, but he attributed that to good physical conditioning rather than experience. "The target is at 800 meters, Rodriguez explained, pointing toward a distant hillside where paper targets had been set up. "Standard procedure is 5 shots, spotter assistance available. We'll start with the basics and work our way up to the fun stuff." The other soldiers had been divided into pairs and assigned to various shooting positions along the firing line. Elena found herself at position 7, coincidentally matching her rifle's number. The soldier assigned as her spotter was a young corporal named Tommy Chen, whose enthusiasm barely contained itself. "Man, I can't believe we get to shoot the Barrett today," Chen whispered as they set up at their position. I've been waiting for this since I got here. You nervous? Elena adjusted the bipod legs with small, precise movements. Not particularly. Chen laughed nervously. Easy for you to say. I heard these things can dislocate your shoulder if you don't hold them right. My buddy Jake fired one last month and said it felt like getting hit by a truck. Elena made a non-committal sound as she settled behind the rifle. She pressed her cheek against the stock and looked through the scope, her movements flowing together like water. Chen watched, impressed despite himself by how natural she looked behind the weapon. Range to target? Elena asked quietly. Chen scrambled to check his spotting scope. 800 meters exactly. Wind is, let me see, about 3 miles per hour from the southwest. Temperature is 72 degrees. Elena nodded and made a slight adjustment to the scope. Rodriguez walked up behind their position, clipboard in hand, ready to observe and take notes. Whenever you're ready, Vasquez, he said. Remember, this isn't basic training. Take your time. Focus on your fundamentals and don't let the recoil surprise you. Elena's finger found the trigger, and she took a slow, controlled breath. The world around her seemed to fade away as she lined up the shot. 800 meters, southwest wind, slight elevation difference, compensation for the rifle's particular tendencies, which she had identified within seconds of handling it. The first shot cracked across the desert like thunder. Rodriguez immediately raised his binoculars to check the target. He blinked twice, then looked again. Bullseye, he announced, unable to keep the surprise out of his voice. Chen whooped with excitement. Holy cow, Elena! That was incredible! Beginner's luck, right? Elena didn't respond. She was already cycling the bolt and chambering the next round. The second shot followed quickly after the first. Another bullseye! Rodriguez called out, his voice now carrying a note of confusion. The third shot came 15 seconds later, then the fourth, then the fifth. Each one found the center of the target with mechanical precision. Rodriguez walked around to face Elena as she cleared the rifle and engaged the safety. Other soldiers from nearby positions had stopped their own shooting to watch, drawn by the unusual consistency of the shots. Well, Rodriguez said slowly, that was impressive, especially for someone who's never fired a Barrett before. Elena looked up at him with the same neutral expression she had worn all morning. The rifle has issues, she said quietly. Excuse me? The rifle, Elena repeated. The barrel harmonics are off. The scope mounting is loose. The trigger group needs adjustment. And the bolt timing is inconsistent. She paused for a moment, then added, It's still shootable, but barely. Rodriguez stared at her. You determined all that from 5 shots? From picking it up, Elena corrected. The shots confirmed it. Chen looked back and forth between them, confused. But if the rifle's messed up, how did she shoot 5 bullseyes? Elena stood up from the firing position and handed the rifle back to Rodriguez. Compensation, she said simply. Rodriguez turned the Barrett over in his hands, suddenly seeing it with new eyes. The weight distribution that had felt slightly off to him. The way the bolt had felt when Elena worked the action. The almost imperceptible wobble in the scope mount. Vasquez, he said carefully. What exactly did you do in that logistics unit in Germany? Elena's expression didn't change. Supply management, inventory control, equipment maintenance oversight. Equipment maintenance oversight, Rodriguez repeated. What kind of equipment? Various types, Elena replied. Small arms, crew-served weapons, specialized systems. Rodriguez felt a chill run down his spine. Specialized systems was military speak that could mean anything from communications gear to weapons so classified that their very existence was compartmentalized. And before Germany? He pressed. Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the same neutral tone, but there was something underneath it now, something that made Rodriguez's instincts sit up and take notice. "Various postings," she said. "You have my file." Rodriguez did have her file. A thin manila folder with the standard transfer paperwork, basic qualification records, and a service history that showed a steady progression through logistics positions. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would explain how a supply clerk could pick up a malfunctioning sniper rifle and shoot 5 consecutive bullseyes at 800 meters. "Chen," Rodriguez said without taking his eyes off Elena, "go grab Master Sergeant Williams from the range office. Tell him I need him out here right now." As Chen jogged away, Rodriguez stepped closer to Elena. Around them, the other soldiers had gone back to their own training, but he could feel curious glances directed their way. "You want to explain to me what just happened here?" Rodriguez asked quietly. Elena looked past him toward the distant targets, then back to his face. "I shot 5 rounds at the target. All 5 hit the center, with a malfunctioning rifle." "Yes. On your first time firing a Barrett?" "Yes." Rodriguez studied her face, looking for any crack in the composure. "Vasquez, I've been training soldiers for 8 years. I've seen natural talent. I've seen lucky shots. I've seen soldiers who practiced until they bled. What I just watched wasn't any of those things." Elena remained silent. "What I just watched," Rodriguez continued, "was someone who knows that rifle better than I do. Someone who identified mechanical problems that our armorer missed. Someone who compensated for those problems without conscious thought." He paused. "Someone who's done this before." Elena's eyes met his, and for just a moment, Rodriguez saw something flicker behind them. Not fear, not guilt, but something deeper, something that looked almost like relief. "I've done a lot of things, Sergeant," Elena said quietly. "Most of them aren't in any file you have access to." Before Rodriguez could respond, Master Sergeant Williams approached with Chen close behind. Williams was a career soldier with 23 years of service, most of it spent in various combat zones. He had the kind of weathered face that came from seeing too much and the sharp eyes of someone who missed very little. "Rodriguez tells me we have an interesting situation here," Williams said without preamble. "Show him the target," Rodriguez replied. Williams raised his binoculars and studied the distant paper target. After a moment, he lowered them and looked at Elena with new interest. "All 5 shots?" "All 5, Rodriguez confirmed, "with rifle number 7. Williams winced. "The one with the timing issues? I was planning to send that back to the armorer today." "She identified the problems just from handling it," Rodriguez said, "then shot 5 consecutive bullseyes anyway." Williams walked over to Elena, who had remained at attention throughout the conversation. He was tall enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes, but she didn't seem intimidated. "What's your name, soldier?" Williams asked. "Elena Vasquez, Master Sergeant." "Where are you from, Vasquez?" "Originally, New Mexico, but I've been stationed overseas for the past several years." Williams nodded slowly. "And what did you do overseas?" Elena's pause was so brief that most people would have missed it. But both Williams and Rodriguez were trained to notice such things. "Logistics operations," Elena said. "Supporting forward units." "Forward units," Williams repeated. "How forward?" Another pause. "Forward enough." Williams exchanged a glance with Rodriguez. In military parlance, forward enough usually meant places where people shot at you on a regular basis. "Vasquez," Williams said, "I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want a direct answer. Have you ever been assigned to a combat unit?" Elena looked at him steadily. "Define combat unit." "Don't play games with me, soldier." Elena was quiet for several seconds, as if weighing her options. When she spoke, her voice carried a different quality than it had before, harder, more certain. "Master Sergeant, My previous assignments are classified under sections that require clearances you don't have. I can't discuss them without proper authorization." She paused. "What I can tell you is that I've been reassigned to regular duty for medical reasons, and I'm here to complete a standard rotation before transitioning to civilian life." Williams felt his pulse quicken. "Medical reasons?" "Physical therapy, stress management, standard post-deployment protocols." Rodriguez looked back and forth between them. "Post-deployment protocols for a logistics specialist?" Elena turned to face him directly. "Sergeant, have you ever supported a sniper team in the field?" The question caught Rodriguez off guard. "No. Have you?" Elena's smile was so brief that he almost missed it. In a manner of speaking, Williams stepped closer. "Vasquez, I need you to be very clear about something. Are you telling us that you have combat experience that isn't reflected in your official file?" "I'm telling you that my official file contains all the information that's available at your clearance level," Elena replied. "Anything else would require authorization from people considerably above your pay grade." Williams felt a familiar chill. He had encountered compartmentalized soldiers before, usually special operations personnel whose real service records were buried so deep that even their commanding officers couldn't access them. "And the shooting demonstration we just witnessed?" he asked. Elena looked toward the distant target, then back at Williams. "Physical therapy includes maintaining basic combat skills. I practice regularly." Rodriguez almost laughed out loud. "Basic combat skills? Lady, what you just did isn't basic anything." Elena shrugged. "It depends on your baseline." Williams made a decision. "Rodriguez, I want you to set up a more challenging scenario. 1,200 meters, multiple targets, variable conditions." "Master Sergeant," Elena said quietly, "I'm not here to show off. I'm here to complete my training and transition to regular duties." "Humor me," Williams replied. "Consider it part of your physical therapy." Elena looked at both men for a long moment. Around them, the normal sounds of range training continued, but Rodriguez could sense that something significant was happening. "Very well," Elena said finally, "but I'll need a rifle that actually works." Williams gestured toward the weapon table. "Take your pick." Elena walked over to the line of Barrett rifles and examined each one with the same methodical attention she had shown to everything else. She picked up 3 different weapons, hefted them, worked their actions, and peered through their scopes before selecting one from the middle of the line. "This one," she said. Rodriguez checked his list. "That's number 12, fresh out of the armorer's shop yesterday." Elena nodded and began walking toward a different firing position, one that offered a better angle on the more distant targets. Williams and Rodriguez followed, along with Chen and several other soldiers who had begun to take notice of the unusual activity. As Elena set up at the new position, Williams studied her movements with professional interest. Every action was precise, economical, purposeful. There was no wasted motion, no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was the kind of muscle memory that came from thousands of repetitions under pressure. "Range to primary target?" Elena asked Chen, who had followed with his spotting scope. Chen fumbled with his equipment for a moment. 1,200 meters to the center target. Wind is maybe 5 miles per hour, but it's shifting. Temperature is rising." Elena made several adjustments to the scope, her fingers moving with the same fluid precision that had characterized all her actions. She settled behind the rifle and began the process of aligning her shot. Williams found himself holding his breath. Around him, other soldiers had quietly gathered to watch. Word was spreading that something unusual was happening at firing position 12. The first shot at 1,200 meters was considerably more challenging than the earlier demonstration. Wind, distance, and atmospheric conditions all played larger roles. For a trained sniper, it was a difficult but manageable shot. For a logistics clerk with no official long-range training, it should have been nearly impossible. Elena's first shot hit dead center. The second shot, fired at a target offset by 30 degrees, hit center. The third shot, at a partially obscured target, hit center. Williams watched through his binoculars as Elena systematically engaged 5 different targets at various ranges and angles. Every shot found its mark with the kind of precision that spoke of extensive training and considerable experience. When she finished, Elena cleared the rifle and engaged the safety with the same methodical care she had shown throughout. She stood up from the firing position and turned to face Williams, her expression as neutral as it had been all morning. "Satisfied, Master Sergeant?" she asked. Williams lowered his binoculars slowly. Around him, the gathered soldiers were talking in excited whispers. On the distant hillside, 5 paper targets bore testament to shooting that belonged in a manual rather than a training exercise. "Vasquez," Williams said quietly. "Who the hell are you, really?" Williams stared at Elena for several long seconds, his mind racing through possibilities. In his 23 years of military service, he had encountered plenty of soldiers with hidden depths, but this was different. The woman standing before him had just demonstrated shooting skills that typically took years to develop, yet her official file showed nothing but logistics assignments. "Chen," Williams said without breaking eye contact with Elena, "I need you to go find Colonel Patterson. Tell him Master Sergeant Williams requests his immediate presence at the range." Chen hesitated. "Should I tell him what this is about, Master Sergeant?" "Tell him we have a situation that requires his attention," Williams replied. "That should be enough." As Chen jogged away, Williams gestured for Elena to follow him to a quiet area away from the other soldiers. Rodriguez fell into step beside them, his curiosity clearly struggling with his sense of duty. "Vasquez," Williams said once they were out of earshot of the others, "I'm going to be straight with you. What I just witnessed doesn't match anything in your file, not even close." Elena remained silent, her hands clasped behind her back in a perfect parade rest position. "Either you're the most naturally gifted shooter I've ever encountered," Williams continued, "or you have training and experience that goes far beyond what's documented. Given some of the things you said earlier about clearance levels and classified assignments, I'm leaning toward the latter." Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "The way you handled that rifle, identified the mechanical problems, compensated for them without thinking, that's not natural talent. That's professional experience." Elena looked past them toward the distant mountains. "As I mentioned before, my previous assignments require authorization to discuss. I'm not trying to be difficult. But there are regulations about operational security that I take seriously." Williams felt a familiar frustration. He had dealt with compartmentalized operations before, usually when special operations personnel were transitioning between assignments. The bureaucracy of classified programs could create situations where a soldier's real qualifications were invisible to their new command structure. "All right," Williams said, "let me ask you this. Are you currently under any medical restrictions that would prevent you from participating in combat operations?" Elena's pause was brief but noticeable. "I'm cleared for limited duty. Physical therapy and stress management protocols are ongoing, but they don't restrict my basic military functions." "Limited duty," Rodriguez repeated. "What kind of injuries are we talking about?" Elena's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. "The kind that come from prolonged exposure to high-stress environments, nothing that affects my ability to perform assigned tasks." Williams nodded slowly. "PTSD protocols?" "Among other things," Elena confirmed. The three of them stood in uncomfortable silence for a moment. Williams had seen enough combat veterans to recognize the signs of someone who had been through experiences that left invisible wounds. The careful control, the measured responses, the way Elena seemed to constantly assess her surroundings, even during casual conversation. "Master Sergeant Williams," Chen's voice called from across the range. "Colonel Patterson is coming out now." Williams turned to see a tall, lean man in his 50s walking toward them with purposeful strides. Colonel Patterson commanded the training battalion and had a reputation for getting to the bottom of unusual situations quickly. His weathered face and sharp eyes suggested someone who had seen his share of combat zones. "Williams," Patterson called as he approached. "Chen said you have a situation that needs my attention. What's going on?" Williams gestured toward Elena. "Sir, I'd like you to meet Specialist Vasquez. She transferred here from a logistics unit in Germany, and she just demonstrated some unusual capabilities." Patterson looked Elena up and down with the practiced eye of someone who had been evaluating soldiers for decades. "What kind of capabilities?" "Long-range marksmanship," Rodriguez answered. "Exceptional accuracy under challenging conditions. Far beyond what you'd expect from someone with her documented training." Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Show me." Williams led the group back toward the firing positions, where several other soldiers were still conducting their training exercises. The paper targets at various distances showed the evidence of the morning's activities, including the perfect groupings that Elena had achieved. "These are hers," Williams said, pointing toward the distant targets. 5 shots at 800 meters with a malfunctioning rifle. Then 5 more at 1,200 meters under variable conditions. Every shot center mass. Patterson studied the targets through binoculars for a long moment. When he lowered them, his expression had changed from mild curiosity to serious interest. "Vasquez," Patterson said, "what's your MOS?" 92Y, sir. Unit Supply Specialist. "How long have you been a 92Y? Elena hesitated. "Approximately 3 years, sir." "Approximately," Patterson repeated. "And before that?" "Various assignments, sir. My service record contains the available information." Patterson turned to Williams. "Have you reviewed her file?" "Standard transfer paperwork," Williams replied. "Nothing unusual. Logistics positions in Germany, and before that, some stateside assignments. No combat decorations, no advanced training schools, no red flags." Patterson nodded and pulled out his phone. He walked a few steps away and made a brief call that the others couldn't overhear. When he returned, his expression was thoughtful. "Vasquez," Patterson said, "I just spoke with someone at personnel. They're going to look into your file and see if there are any additional records that might not have transferred with your standard paperwork." Elena's posture remained rigid, but something flickered across her face. "Sir, I should mention that some of my previous assignments may have administrative complications." "What kind of complications?" "The kind that require specific authorization to access," Elena replied carefully. Patterson studied her for several seconds. "Specialist, are you telling me that you have a classified service record?" "I'm telling you that not all of my service record may be available through standard channels." Patterson felt his pulse quicken. Compartmentalized service records were usually associated with special operations units, intelligence assignments, or other sensitive postings. The kind of jobs that produced soldiers with skills far beyond their official military occupational specialty. "All right," Patterson said, "here's what we're going to do. Williams, I want you to set up some additional training scenarios for Specialist Vasquez. Let's see exactly what we're dealing with here." Elena straightened. "Sir, I'm not sure that's necessary. I'm here to complete standard training before transitioning to civilian life." "Humor me," Patterson replied. "Consider it part of your evaluation process." Williams looked around the range and made a decision. "There's a scenario course we use for advanced training. Urban environment simulation, multiple targets at various ranges and angles, time limits, stress factors." Elena's eyes sharpened almost imperceptibly. "What kind of stress factors?" "Simulated combat conditions," Rodriguez answered. "Noise, time pressure, physical challenges. It's designed to test decision-making under pressure." Elena was quiet for a moment, as if weighing her options. "How long is the course?" 30 minutes, Williams replied. Most soldiers need multiple attempts to complete it successfully. Elena nodded slowly. Very well, but I'll need some time to familiarize myself with the course layout. Patterson smiled grimly. Take all the time you need. 20 minutes later, Elena stood at the entrance to the urban simulation course. The setup was impressive, a series of concrete barriers and wooden structures designed to replicate a small-town environment. Paper targets were positioned at windows, doorways, and rooftops, representing both hostile and civilian figures. Soldiers had to navigate the course while engaging only the appropriate targets within strict time limits. Elena had walked through the course twice, studying angles and distances with the same methodical attention she had shown to everything else. Now she stood ready with the Barrett rifle, extra magazines secured to her gear, eyes focused on the starting point. Rules are simple, Williams explained through the radio headset she wore. Green targets are hostiles, red targets are civilians. You have 30 minutes to clear the course. Shots on civilians result in immediate failure. Miss too many hostile targets and you fail. Any questions? Elena shook her head. Begin when ready, Williams announced. Elena moved into the course with fluid grace. The heavy rifle held at the ready position. Unlike most soldiers who approach the scenario with obvious tension, she seemed to flow through the environment like she belonged there. The first target appeared in a second-story window 50 meters ahead. Elena dropped to one knee, acquired the target, and fired in one smooth motion. The paper silhouette showed a perfect center hit. She was moving again before the empty brass casing hit the ground. Patterson watched through binoculars from the observation tower, Williams and Rodriguez flanking him. That was fast, Patterson commented. Too fast, Rodriguez agreed. Most soldiers take at least 10 seconds to identify and engage the first target. Elena continued through the course with mechanical precision. Each target was acquired and eliminated with minimal wasted motion. When civilian targets appeared mixed with hostiles, she discriminated between them instantly, never hesitating or second-guessing her decisions. Time check, Williams called over the radio. 12 minutes, came the response from the range control tower. Elena had covered nearly 2/3 of the course in 12 minutes, a pace that would have been considered exceptional for experienced infantry soldiers. For someone officially classified as a supply specialist, it was impossible to explain. Look at her movement patterns, Patterson said quietly. She's not just shooting targets. She's clearing rooms. She's checking corners. She's using cover and concealment like someone who's done this in the real world. Rodriguez nodded grimly. This isn't training behavior. This is combat experience. On the course below, Elena rounded a corner and encountered the most challenging scenario. Multiple targets at varying ranges, some partially concealed, some moving on mechanical tracks. It was designed to replicate the chaos of actual combat where threats could appear from any direction. Elena's response was immediate and devastating. She engaged the furthest target first, then worked her way closer, prioritizing threats based on their potential danger rather than their proximity. Each shot was deliberate and accurate. Within 60 seconds, all hostile targets had been eliminated without a single hit on a civilian figure. Final time, the range control tower announced. 18 minutes, 37 seconds. Perfect score. Patterson lowered his binoculars slowly. In 5 years of running the advanced training course, he had never seen a perfect score achieved in under 20 minutes. Most soldiers required multiple attempts just to complete it successfully. Elena emerged from the course exit point and cleared her rifle with practiced efficiency. She walked over to the observation tower where the others waited, her breathing barely elevated despite the physical demands of the exercise. Well? She asked simply. Patterson stared at her. Specialist Vasquez. That was the most professional demonstration of combat marksmanship I've witnessed outside of special operations units. Elena's expression remained neutral. Thank you, sir. That's not a compliment, Patterson continued. That's a statement of fact that doesn't match anything in your official record. Elena looked past him toward the course she had just completed. Sir, as I've mentioned, not all of my service record may be immediately accessible. Patterson made another phone call, this one longer and more involved than the first. The others watched as his expression grew increasingly serious during the conversation. When he hung up, Patterson looked directly at Elena. Specialist, I just spoke with someone at SOCOM headquarters. They're sending someone here to discuss your situation. Elena went very still. Sir, that may not be necessary. I'm afraid it is, Patterson replied. According to the person I just spoke with, your name appears in some very interesting databases that require special clearances to access. Elena's carefully maintained composure finally showed a crack. When will they arrive? Tonight, Patterson said. Until then, you're restricted to base. Master Sergeant Williams will ensure you have appropriate quarters and meals. Elena nodded slowly. Sir, I should mention that my presence here may complicate things for your unit. My previous assignments sometimes had political sensitivities. Patterson felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of political sensitivities? Elena looked at each of them in turn before answering. The kind that involved national security and operations that officially never happened. Rodriguez whistled softly. Lady, just who the hell are you? Elena's smile was sad and tired. Sergeant, I've been asking myself that same question for the past 6 months. Before anyone could respond, Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and metallic. She held it in her closed fist for a moment, as if making a final decision. Master Sergeant Williams, she said quietly, you asked earlier who I really am. I think it's time you understood. She opened her hand, revealing a small military decoration. It was unlike any medal the others had seen before, a silver eagle perched on crossed rifles, with strange markings etched around the edges. Williams took the medal and examined it closely. The craftsmanship was exceptional, clearly custom-made rather than standard military issue. But it was the tiny numbers etched along the bottom edge that made his blood run cold. 427, he read aloud. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. Confirmed kills, 3 tours, 4 different countries, operations that don't exist in any official record. Patterson felt the world shift around him. You're telling me you're a sniper? Elena's eyes met his directly. Was. I was a sniper. Now I'm just trying to figure out how to be something else. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of approaching vehicles. Through the dust clouds, they could see a convoy of black SUVs heading toward the range. Elena looked toward the vehicles and sighed deeply. It appears my past just caught up with me. The convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the range with military precision, engines shutting off in perfect synchronization. Elena watched their approach with the resigned expression of someone who had been expecting this moment for months. Colonel Patterson stepped forward as the lead vehicle's doors opened. 2 men in dark suits emerged, followed by a woman in military fatigues bearing the insignia of a lieutenant colonel. The woman moved with the same controlled precision that Elena had displayed all day. Colonel Patterson? The woman asked, approaching with purposeful strides. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Joint Special Operations Command. We need to discuss Specialist Vasquez. Patterson nodded grimly. Colonel Mitchell, I assume this is about her service record? Mitchell glanced toward Elena, who stood at attention despite not being formally addressed. Among other things, is there somewhere we can speak privately? The briefing room in the range office, Patterson suggested. But I think my senior NCOs should be present. They've been working with Specialist Vasquez today. Mitchell considered this for a moment. Very well. But understand that some of what we'll discuss is classified at levels that may be new to you. As the group walked toward the range office, Elena fell into step beside Mitchell. The two women moved with similar bearing, and Rodriguez noticed they both unconsciously checked sight lines and exit routes as they walked. "How are you doing, Ghost?" Mitchell asked quietly. Elena's step faltered slightly. "I haven't used that name in 6 months." "I know, but old habits die hard, don't they?" Elena looked toward the distant mountains. "Some habits die harder than others." The briefing room was small and utilitarian, with a conference table surrounded by metal chairs and walls covered with training schedules and safety posters. Once everyone was seated, Mitchell opened a leather portfolio and spread several documents across the table. "Gentlemen," Mitchell began, "what I'm about to share with you is classified secret under the Special Access Program protocols. You'll need to sign non-disclosure agreements before we proceed." Patterson, Williams, and Rodriguez exchanged glances. They had all dealt with classified material before, but special access programs were reserved for the most sensitive operations. After the paperwork was completed, Mitchell turned to Elena. "Would you like to tell them, or should I?" Elena was quiet for several seconds. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that hadn't been there before. "My real name is Elena Vasquez. That part is true. But my military occupational specialty hasn't been 92Y for almost 4 years." She paused, gathering herself. 4 years ago, I was selected for a Joint Special Operations program. Sniper Elimination Specialist, my official record was sanitized, and I was assigned to a logistics unit as cover. Williams leaned forward. "Cover for what?" Mitchell answered. "High-value target elimination in contested areas. Elena was part of a small team that operated in regions where the United States couldn't officially acknowledge having personnel." Rodriguez felt his mouth go dry. "Assassination missions?" "Counter-terrorism operations," Mitchell corrected. Elena's targets were individuals who posed direct threats to American lives and interests. Terrorist leaders, weapons dealers, foreign operatives planning attacks on U.S. forces. Elena stared at her hands. 427 confirmed eliminations over 3 tours. Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and 1 deployment I still can't discuss. Patterson whistled softly. "That's an extraordinary number." "It's a record," Mitchell said grimly. "No other American sniper in modern warfare has achieved that level of operational success." Elena looked up sharply. "Success is a relative term, Colonel." Mitchell nodded with understanding. "Which brings us to why Elena is here instead of still in the field." Elena's jaw tightened. "Burnout is a polite way to put it. Psychological evaluation indicated that continued operations would pose risks to both Elena and her team," Mitchell explained. "After her final mission 6 months ago, she was reassigned to transition duty pending medical evaluation and possible discharge." Williams studied Elena's face. "What happened 6 months ago?" Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I hesitated." "Explain," Patterson requested. Elena looked toward the window, though her eyes seemed to be seeing something far away. "High-value target in Mosul. Terrorist leader responsible for attacks on coalition forces. I had a clean shot, 500 meters, perfect conditions." She paused, her hands unconsciously mimicking the grip on a rifle. "But there was a child, a little girl, maybe 8 years old, playing in the courtyard below the target's position. She had a doll, and she was singing to it." The room was silent except for the distant sounds of training activities outside. "I watched through my scope for 47 minutes, Elena continued, waiting for the child to move, waiting for a clean shot. But she stayed right there, directly in my line of fire." Mitchell leaned forward. "Elena, the target was eliminated." "The mission was successful." Elena's laugh was bitter. "Yes, I took the shot, But in that 47 minutes, I realized I couldn't tell the difference anymore between the child and the target. They both looked like people to me. Real people with families and hopes and fears. Rodriguez felt a chill run through him. And before that? Before that, targets were just targets. Problems to be solved. Threats to be eliminated. Elena's voice grew stronger. But something changed that day. I started seeing faces instead of objectives. Patterson understood. And a sniper who sees targets as people instead of problems becomes a liability. To themselves and their team, Mitchell confirmed. Elena's psychological evaluation showed classic signs of combat stress reaction combined with moral injury. She needed time to decompress and figure out who she wanted to be after the war. Elena straightened in her chair. Which is why I requested transfer to a logistics unit. I wanted to do something that helped people instead of the other thing. Williams looked at the medal still sitting on the table between them. But you kept this. Elena picked up the small decoration, turning it over in her fingers. It was made for me by the unit armorer after my 100th confirmed kill. He said every warrior needed something to remember their battles by. She set the medal down carefully. For 3.5 years, it represented everything I was proud of. My service, my skill, my contribution to keeping other soldiers safe. But lately, it just feels heavy. Mitchell opened another folder from her portfolio. Elena. The reason we came here today isn't just to explain your background. We have a proposition. Elena went very still. I'm not going back to operational status. We're not asking you to, Mitchell replied. But your skills are too valuable to waste. We'd like you to consider a training position. Patterson leaned forward with interest. What kind of training position? Mitchell spread several documents across the table. Advanced marksmanship instructor. You'd work with special operations candidates, teaching them not just how to shoot, but how to think like a sniper, how to make decisions under pressure, how to maintain psychological balance in high-stress situations. Elena studied the documents without touching them. Teaching others to do what I did? Teaching others to do it better, Mitchell corrected. To do it smarter. To do it in ways that don't leave them questioning who they are when the mission is over. Rodriguez spoke up. You mean teaching them to avoid what happened to you? Mitchell nodded. Elena's experience, both her successes and her struggles, makes her uniquely qualified to prepare the next generation of specialized operators. She understands both the technical and psychological demands of the job. Elena was quiet for several long minutes. The others waited, understanding that this was a decision that would define the rest of her career, possibly her life. I'd be based where? Elena finally asked. Fort Benning initially, Mitchell replied. Eventually, wherever advanced sniper training is conducted, you'd hold the rank of staff sergeant with potential for advancement based on performance. Elena looked around the table at the faces of the 3 men who had spent the day trying to figure out who she really was. What about my current assignment? Patterson smiled slightly. Specialist, I think it's safe to say that your talents are wasted in basic marksmanship training. Elena picked up the medal again, holding it up to the light. The etched numbers 427 seemed to glow in the afternoon sun streaming through the window. Colonel Mitchell, Elena said slowly, if I accept this position, would I be helping to create more soldiers like me? Mitchell leaned back in her chair. You'd be helping to create soldiers who are better than you were, soldiers who understand the full cost of what they're doing, soldiers who go into the field with tools not just for winning, but for coming home whole. Elena set the medal down on the table and looked directly at Mitchell. I have conditions. Name them. First, I want to be involved in developing psychological support protocols for snipers, not just the technical training, but the mental health aspects. Mitchell nodded. Agreed. Second, I want to work with researchers studying combat stress and moral injury. My experiences need to help other soldiers avoid the problems I faced. Also agreed. Elena took a deep breath. And third, I want to keep my current rank and pay grade until I prove myself in the new position. No special treatment because of my combat record. Mitchell smiled. Elena, you've just described exactly the kind of instructor we need. Elena looked around the table one more time, her gaze lingering on each face. Then yes, I accept. Patterson felt a wave of relief he hadn't expected. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, I think this is the right decision. Elena stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the range where soldiers were still conducting training exercises. You know what's funny? When I woke up this morning, I thought today would be just another day of hiding who I used to be. Rodriguez joined her at the window. And now? Elena's smile was genuine for the first time all day. Now I'm thinking about who I might become. Mitchell began gathering her documents. There's paperwork to complete and logistics to arrange, but you could start the new position within 30 days. Elena nodded. Colonel, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you find me so quickly? The phone call to SOCOM. The immediate response, getting here so fast? Mitchell's expression grew serious. Elena, we've been keeping track of you since your reassignment. Not surveillance, but concern. Soldiers with your level of specialized training and combat experience don't just disappear into the regular army without someone noticing. Elena frowned. You've been watching me. We've been taking care of you, Mitchell corrected. Making sure you had the support you needed during your transition. Making sure you didn't fall through the cracks. Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The sense of being part of something larger than herself. Thank you. Mitchell stood up and extended her hand. Elena, it's been an honor meeting you. Your service record speaks for itself. But your willingness to turn your experience into something that helps others speaks even louder. Elena shook her hand firmly. Colonel, I have one more question. Go ahead. Elena picked up the medal from the table and held it in her palm. What do I do with this? Mitchell studied the small decoration for a moment. What do you want to do with it? Elena was quiet for several seconds. Then she walked back to the window and looked out at the soldiers on the range, young men and women learning the fundamentals of marksmanship. I want to earn it again, she said quietly. Not with confirmed kills, but with lives saved. With soldiers who come home better prepared. With people who benefit from what I learned the hard way. She turned back to face the others. 427 is a number I'll carry forever. But maybe the next number I count can be how many soldiers I help instead of how many targets I eliminated. Rodriguez felt an unexpected surge of respect for the woman he had initially dismissed as just another transfer from logistics. Elena, for what it's worth, I think you're going to be an outstanding instructor. Elena smiled, and for the first time all day, it reached her eyes. Sergeant, ask me again in a year. By then, I'll have earned the right to call myself by my real name again. Williams stood up and walked over to Elena. What name is that? Elena looked down at the medal in her hand, then back up at Williams. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez, Advanced Marksmanship Instructor, someone who teaches others not just how to hit targets, but how to come home from war as the same person who left. She closed her hand around the medal, but this time it didn't feel heavy. This time it felt like a promise. Outside the window, the sun was setting over the training range, casting long shadows across the desert. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, and new purposes. But for the first time in 6 months, Elena Vasquez felt ready to face them. She was no longer Ghost, the sniper with 427 confirmed kills. She was Elena, the instructor who would help others find their way home.